Okay, this is the one you guys have been waiting for, the DNA20 HANA mod from FastTech. So let's talk about this thing, okay? Basically, this thing is a one-to-one clone. You go ahead and turn on the power of this thing. It says right away, you know, the Evolve DNA20, okay? And all of its functions are pretty much down to a T with the original HANA mod. You have your fire button over here, up button and down button. Okay, so you know, up button turns the wattage up, down button turns the wattage down. Goes from 7 watts to 20 watts. This thing fires as low as 1 ohm. Okay, so basically it will not fire anything sub ohm. So 1 ohm is the minimum that it can go to, right? So let's talk about this thing. As far as its features is concerned, all right, the features is exactly the same as a regular DNA20 device. So in order to do that, we will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then, sorry, okay, and then go over to the locked version, and then we hold the power button and then the up button, right? And then we could toggle between left mode and right mode. So we hold this down and then give it a little while, and then it will say right mode. Okay, I'm still holding it down, and then it will go over to left mode, right? So I haven't let go, so afterwards it will just toggle back to right mode. So at any time, you know, once you got the mode that you want, you just go ahead and let go. So the other mode over here would be the stealth mode, right? So we hold down this in the bottom button, and first it will show as normal mode, and then while still holding it down, it will toggle over to stealth mode. Okay, you guys already know what stealth mode is, so we're just going to go back to normal mode. Okay, for those of you who don't know what stealth mode is, basically what happens is that, like, you could fire the button, and then your atomizer will, you know, fire without seeing any of the lights over here. Okay, all right. So what is there to know about this item, basically? Okay, this thing is basically, in my opinion, with your basic atomizers and your meters. It's kind of off by 1, all right? It may not be with yours, but it is with mine. So, for instance, over here, okay, I have a K-fund that's built at 1.3, so let me turn this thing on real quick, and you'll see 1.29, basically 1.3, okay? So if I went ahead and then screwed this atomizer onto the HANA mod over here, it should read 1.3. Instead, when we fire it, it says 1.4. Let me focus this for you guys at home, so that, see that, 1.4 instead of 1.3. Okay, so it's just basically off by 1. What does this tell me? This tells me that if I go ahead and build things on the meter over here, that means I could go as low as 0.9 without going over, and still be able to fire on my FastTech HANA mod. Right? So this one's a 0.94 over here. So if it's 0.94, it should not be able to fire. But since, you know, there is a difference over here, you compensate by 1. Okay. Once I screw this thing on and then show you guys over here, when I fire, it'll just read as the 1.1, 1.0. See what I'm saying? 1.1, 1.0, something like that. Okay. So basically, it's off by 1. So what happens if you're off by a lot? Well, let's get a dripper, and dripper is always built very low. So over here I got a TOBH, right? So what I have built in here is pretty big coils, and then if I clock this thing, I got 0.55. So if I go with the 0.55 over here and put this back on top of our HANA mod, whoops, excuse me guys. Okay, once I fire over here, it will say check atomizer. Okay, so it won't fire this. So basically, you could build things as low as 0.9 on this meter, and then it'll register as that 1 ohm. Okay. What else is there to know about this thing? The pass-through over here, the USB pass-through, okay? This pass-through, in my opinion, is incredibly slow, okay? Yeah, you could shove your USB over here and then, you know, just go ahead and let it charge, but I feel as if it it takes quite a while. All right. So instead, what we can do is that we can flip this thing around and then go through its back panel instead. And over here, okay, if I go ahead and release screw over here and release the screw over here, okay, have this opened up, you see that I have a Sony VTC over here. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove this one. What it came with originally, okay, is a an EFES 2000 over here, IMR battery. Okay, as we know with DNA devices, you know, Provaris, all sorts of stuff like that, they all recommend that we go, you know, IMR only, IMR, IMR, IMR. Okay, so if I had to go ahead and replace the battery, I would just go ahead and replace another battery of VTC5, VTC4, you know, whatever that's directly off my charger, and that is a lot faster than, you know, trying to charge the battery off of the USB port. Okay, so after this, put our screws back on. Okay, there we go, and then it's ready for use again. Okay, I didn't put on a fresh battery, so you know, this thing is still half. All right. Anyways, couple of things about this item that I want to specifically talk about and point out some stuff that you may or may not already know. Okay, so let's go to another camera and then we'll talk more about it. Alright guys, so I really hope you stayed for this portion of the video, okay, because normally I don't do item reviews, okay, and I just don't do item reviews. I don't really know how to do them, okay. What I did about this HANA mod at the end right now is that I'm going to give you my 2 cents about this, okay, and I'm usually not wrong about stuff, right, so pay very close attention to this. So we're over here at the Rip Trippers video, okay. Why am I here? Okay, I need to point out something real quick, okay? If you go over and then you check out his videos and then you toggle everything from the newest to oldest, okay, you will see that, you know, he's got like all these mods and different kind of videos and stuff like that, okay? So my question is, what was the first time you really saw a spotlight video about like the HANA mod of the DNA20, right? Most likely off of Rip Tripper, right? But what I really need to point out of what Rip is doing regarding like these mods and stuff, right, is that Rip Tripper hasn't been talking about a tank for a really long time. If you click on any of these like Overdose, Aurelius mods, blah blah blah, Axis mods, IGO-M, or you know what I mean? See these builds and stuff like that, IGO-W6, these are all drippers. Every single video here is a dripper. In fact, if you load more, okay, and you will notice that the last time Rip even talks about any kind of tank system whatsoever was back with the Russian Big. And if you look over here, that was 4 months ago. Okay, so Rip hasn't touched a dripper. So what is my point? What is my point about all this stuff? Okay, well, I think about this is that like the HANA mod is very, very powerful. Okay, and there's a couple of things of why it's powerful and some stuff that I really need to make known to people. Okay, some of you might think of it as duh, and then some of you might think of it as, you know, well, wow, I didn't see it that way. Okay, and the thing is this, right? All of the stuff that Rip does, whether it's the HANA mod, DNA20, DNA30, you know what I mean? All those, the new stuff that he has, the G2s or whatever, everything is on a dripper. So what is the difference between this and a dripper? Well, as I said before, okay, and I'm going to be saying it in a lot more other videos, okay, is that wicking is an art form, and that is very, very important, right? Why is it important? Because how much wick, you know, the wicking action of how much juice flow to the wicks without flooding, yet it has to keep up with the heat. You know what I mean? That whole thing is an art form in its own. Okay. For instance, when you use a dripper, okay, let's say we have the Patriot RDA on this thing or something like that. Okay, you wicked the coil, but there is no actual wicking action going on. Why? Because you pop the top cap off or you pop the drip tip off and then you prime the wicks constantly. Now, priming the wicks is always perfect saturation, if not over saturation. You know what I mean? Like the wicks are always saturated and ready to go. You're not going to really receive any dry hits unless you've been puffing and puffing, and now the hits are starting to turn dry. Right. So every time you see Rip do a video or whatever, he's always got, I got the Patriot RDA, I got the Still Air, I got the all different kinds of RDAs, and then you see him like blow huge clouds with it because they're RDAs. Okay. So what is my point about all this? My point is that, like, if you're a tank man like me, okay, you like Aquas, you like Foggers, you like the Aga series, you like Genesis, you like things like that, okay? Uh, the DNA20 device is going to provide enough heat, more than enough heat, than most of these tank systems can handle. So there's no reason for you to go ahead and buy a DNA30, buy the GI Joe, go up to like 50 watts and 100 watts or whatever, because your tank system will never catch up to it. Okay, let me put a few tanks. Popular tanks, so that you guys have an idea of what's going on. If you go ahead and slap on like an Aspire Nautilus to this thing, okay, let me just go ahead and bring up some photos so that, like, some people at home know that, like, what we're talking about. Okay, so Aspire Nautilus over here. Okay, here's some images. If you go ahead and you slap this thing on the Fastech DNA20 device, okay, 7 watts, the minimum is really pushing it there. Okay, 8 watts, 9 watts, you're going to start feeling this thing really, really cook, and by 10 watts, it's definitely burnt. Okay, K-Funds. Okay, the K-Fund 3.1. Okay, if you put a K-Fund on this thing, okay, no matter how you build it or whatever, right? For me, 10 watts is pretty good. 12 watts is really nice. 14 watts is really pushing it. Anything after 14 watts, like 16 watts, 17 watts, or whatever, my coil is burnt. Like whatever I built with the wicking or whatever, that's burnt. Okay, the new Fogger V4 that we're a lot of us are looking at, right? So Fogger V4 Plus. Okay, this version, right? If you watch my new Fogger V4 Plus version, and then how we use like a K-Fund, a dual coil K-Fund build inside, that thing, I could take it up all the way to 19 watts, maybe 20, right? And it just perfectly supports the wicking action of that. Perfectly supports the DNA20. You know what I mean? I know for a fact that, like, once we go up to, like, the DNA30, and then we go to like 21, 22, 23, whatever watts, that coil is burnt. Okay, and it's gonna taste burnt, and it's gonna taste terrible. And a lot of juices, once it's burnt, whatever, like either it burns your nose or it gives you, like, that mini headache or whatever. It's an awful feeling. Okay, burnt coils are terrible. So this is exactly what I'm saying. If you're a tank man, DNA20 is a good enough device as it is, and you could stop right here. The whole point of the 30 watts, the 50 watts, the 100 watts, crank it up, and or it's so that, like, you could build like other different kinds of coils and stuff like that, right? And then turn it up, and then the performance is different, as opposed to using a mechanical device. You would have no choice but to just go with like 24 gauge wire, 22 gauge wire, twist up 26 gauge wire or whatever, and then let the battery and the amperage that get really hot, as opposed to using a regular device and then turning up the wattage instead. Okay, here's another thing that I wanted to point out about the DNA20 that's definitely good to know. All right, is that let me reset this real quick. All right. You will notice that once you have this device, okay, 12 watts on this thing does not feel like 12 watts on your other devices, and it definitely doesn't feel like 12 watts on any of your kick devices, okay? Things set around like 10 watts, 12 watts, or whatever on your mechanical kick, okay, definitely doesn't feel like this. For instance, I have a kick in my Nemesis with the K-Fund, okay? We're puffing it at 10 watts, not bad, not bad. We crank it up to 12. Wow, it's getting pretty interesting. We pump it up all the way to 15 watts. Well, okay, it's a little more than we need, okay? But the thing is that, like, it's not burning the coil, okay? It's just really hot and really dense vapor, that's all. So what is going on? Earlier, I said that like the HANA mod, this thing, right? It's reading the resistance off by a point. Okay, and that does kind of make a difference. Look, I want to show you, I want to prove it to you guys with the Ohm's law calculator over here. Okay, so earlier, what we're talking about is that like in my K-fun, I built like a 1.3. I specifically built a 1.3, but the HANA mod is reading it at 1.4. So what does that mean? Okay, it means that like if the resistance was 1.3 and we were vaping this thing at 12 watts, right? Then what happens is that like the battery will put out an output of 3.94. Okay, however, because the HANA mod thinks it's 1.4, you see what I'm saying? Then if we put this thing at like, you know, power 12 watts, it's going to give us 4.09. This thing is almost 4.1. All right. So in retrospect, what does that mean? It means that like the coil in here is 1.3, but the HANA mod thinks it's 1.4. So it's going to pump 4.1 volts into it anyways. You see what I'm saying? So therefore, 12 watts here is a lot stronger than 12 watts anywhere else. You see what I'm saying? Because it's calibrated off a little bit, right? So this is what I'm saying. Once you crank the sucker up to like 18 watts, 19 watts, or whatever, right? Unless you're on an RDA device, right? The wicking of most tank systems will not support what's going on over here. You know what I mean? You might be able to do it with like a tilted Genesis, because you know a Genesis like just wicks and leaks very easily, especially if like let's say the wick that you're using inside is like a stainless steel cable as opposed to like mesh or silica or anything like that. Yeah, then it might be able to keep up with it. But you know, as I said before, if it was something like a Nautilus, yeah, 7 watts, that's it. Just keep it at the minimum, okay? If it was something more like a K-fun or whatever, then 12 watts, 14 watts is good enough. So, again, you know what I mean? What you see on Rip's videos where he's blowing huge clouds, cranking it up to like 30 watts, 40 watts, 50 watts, 100 watts, yeah, those are done on a dripper, and just keep that in mind, okay? So, that's it with my review. Take care, guys.